It's a Repsol 2016 with the front leaking front suspension. I suspect that mostly problem is with the top bushing, and I will explain you why it's a problem over there. So the tools we're going to need, it's a torque wrench. I grabbed some breaker, ratchets, extension, 8 millimeters, 10, 12, 19 and 22, and then from the Allen key it's a 10 and 6. I also going to use the flat screwdrivers, and the parts of my choice, it's a fork oil Maxima 5 weights. We'll need 410 milliliters on a fork which doesn't have a spring, 405 on the one which has a spring, and I will go and explain you. Usually the suspect of leaking is actually this top bushing, and because it's a Teflon inside, every time when the suspension goes up and down, it's causing a friction over there. It's if you take a look at the Showa suspension and the Tech, they're extremely similar. Sometimes you just basically feel like they're exactly the same. This is the bottom bushing. So the bottom bushing has Teflon on the outside, and usually they never wear out. Usually the top one. So if the top one Teflon is actually wear out inside, the pressure every time when the suspension goes down, the pressure it's too great, and the seal doesn't want to hold. And you know what? I would suspect that if I replace only this one, I wouldn't have to replace the seal. So the way how I'm going to actually make this movie for you guys is I'm going to speed up everything which is simple, like taking off the front fender. So it's going to be super increase speed. The whole repair took me about 1 hour 10 minutes, but I was trying to record for you some footages so you know what I was going to do, and I was doing. So the parts which I think it's crucial, I slow down or I put on a normal mode. But I will just explain you step by step what I'm doing. So obviously I take off the front fender. After fender I take off the caliper. Then I went on the right hand side and then released the 8mm bolt with Allen key to be able to undo the front axle, take off the wheel. Then I decide to put the axle inside, and then 19 millimeter socket, and loosen up the bottom plugs from the fork. Then I drop those forks, those legs a little bit lower, and the reason is that yes, you know, the professional mechanics, they have a nice vise and then they can use some Teflon or some blocks to keep them inside. I don't have this luxury, so I just basically use a bike as my vise, and this way I was able to loosen up the bottom and then the top. Now I take off the bottom bolt. The difference between the one without the spring on the right side and the plug over there, it's basically it's a little bit pointy. And then when we go on the left hand side, the one which holds the caliper, you will notice that it's a small hole over there. Now, funny enough, the Tech and Showa, they look extremely similar inside. So if you watch the Showa repair, it's going to be almost similar to the Tech. I'm not quite sure how this happened. Even the measurements are very, very similar. So from the right side, the one which doesn't have a spring, I take off the dust seal, and then it was a safety ring over there, so I fish it with the screwdriver. I also loosen up the bottom bolt, and this way I was able to, now you just basically have to hammer it down the movement, so the other parts, the main seal and then the ring, will go out of the leg. So this is a little bit of the process. I think that I should actually, it will be better, I will have a better movement if I take this from the 333, but I decide to keep it on the bike, and then obviously I hit this one with the pen, so it's just make a little bit less. So this is a lower, I call this bushing, but I think that they call this ring. Really very easy to take it off, and then you have to take it off if you want to pull the stuff from the bottom. So it's a bottom ring, and then this is a top one. I'm showing this, I'm inspecting basically this one. I was interested if it's any issues over there, and at first glance everything seems okay, but later on when I look over there, it's actually appeared that it was a small bubble on the surface of the Teflon. I'm showing you that on the bottom part, I call this cartilage. It looks like a little bit like a cup basically. So the bolt and then the cup, this whole goes together. So when you take it off, you have to remember to put it all stuff together. I clean those parts with the Varsol, or Varsol, it's nothing else like mineral oil. So every time when the oil works, and then aluminum or any kind of the Teflon, especially Teflon, they will create a little bit of the dirt and murky oil. So I think it's a good idea to just clean it. From the main part, you can notice that it's a almost looks like a cartilage, like a syringe. So this one, I have no clue how. I'm not the mechanic, but obviously you have to nicely clean, and then you can inspect the other ring over there. This one looks a little bit like that's some kind of the it's a different, completely different material. Not quite sure what it is. And then obviously the top O-ring you have to inspect as well, making sure that it's nice and clean. So I think that the biggest issue with the front suspension, when you take it apart, it's to clean very carefully all those parts, put them on the side, and then put them in a way so you can see exactly what you're doing later on when you put these parts together. I think that book actually has a Montesa book has a pretty good diagram, and tech you can find it as well. So as you can see, I lay out the whole part. So it's a bottom screw. This is this kind of the it just looks like a cup, which have to go on this aluminum part. This whole stuff have to go actually from the main rod on the other side in, and then you can see the whole bottom body of the front suspension, and then you have a lower ring, this magic upper ring, then it's a big washer, and after washer you have this spring, safety spring, which holds everything together, and then dust seal. So on the side, as you can see, this bolt, sometimes you have to take a look at those bolts, because this one, it's missing right now the washer, which is basically what is it? Copper. It looks like a copper basically. So sometimes it just sticks inside, so you need to make sure that you fish this, because otherwise you're not going to have a proper seal. The top one, you can see it's a cup, and then it's just like an aluminum extension. It's a washer, and then after washer you have a spring. So this is from the left hand side, the one where the caliper, the brake caliper, it's mounted. So this one here, I took it apart, and I learned previously from the explosion I did with the right one. So this one I'm going to pull it out and then take the spring out. And it seems that one side of the spring, the bottom one, it's a little bit more narrower. So you need to make sure that you're putting this in the proper way. So this one here, I'm taking the dust cover right now. Very easy. You just basically pry with your flat screwdriver. You just basically take your time, you know. I use on this bike the SKF seals, and they're actually pretty good. Probably one of my colleague Mark, he said that those are one of the best, and I think that they are actually pretty good. They don't break. But as I mentioned before, the problem is not with this is the magic spring, and then inside this body it's just basically small groove, and then it have to be over there. So this one has as well cartilage, and then I just basically pull it out. So as you can see, now I'm just actually showing over there, and you can see the small residue of almost like a little particles of cotton, like. So this is a particle of the Teflon from the upper ring, and so this is the main seal, and then big washer, aluminum washer. And this is the magic ring, the one which I think it's always causing a problem. It doesn't matter whether it's a Showa or Tech. I replace in my Beta, when I used to have a Beta, I replace it as well. So it's just common. So you can see over there on the top part right now how it's wear out. And I think that what it's actually doing this, you know, when you do the front wheel, it's going up and down, it's taking off some particle of the Teflon, and this Teflon goes in between the shaft basically and the seal, and that's the reason why you have a small leakage. If it's a problem with the seal, then you will see really a lot of oil coming out. But if it's a little bit of the oil, it's usually not. I don't think that it's a seal. I think that this is the stupid top ring. Yes. Now, so I mentioned that this bottom, it could be either way. It could be on the left or right side. Sometimes this washer, the bronze washer, sticks. So just need to make sure that you have to pull it, that you are going to pull it out. And then very similar, because it's oil inside, in the main, in the bottom part, it's still over there, the small, it just looks like a cup with a hole. So it's still there. And when I actually wash it, oh, now it just fell off, yes. So again, you know, this part, it's crucial. So again, I speed up a little bit the whole process, because otherwise it's going to be boring. And again, I'm just showing you that this cartilage, which is going to the main shaft, when you pull it down, you pull from the other side this this cup, yes, this aluminum cup. Sorry, I'm not the mechanic, so I learn everything by you know, trying and then just reading, and I just figure it out. You know, my English is a second language, so obviously my my English is a little bit limited, especially with naming the parts. It will be much easier in my mother tongue, but this one here, it's a little bit challenging for me, especially that I'm not working every day as a mechanic. So I just put this together on a nice flat surface so you can see the parts. So the top part, the spring, the main shaft, the cartilage inside. So this cartilage is actually, the spring is touching the cartilage.
inside, and then you have this small aluminum part, and you have a bottom body, and then again lower ring, then the higher ring, main seal, then it have to be this magic spring which holds everything together, and then dust seal. So those are basically the parts in Showa suspension. So now after cleaning and preparing everything for putting this stuff together, I will slow it down, the movie, and then you can see what I'm doing step by step. Uh, don't get frustrated. Just take your time. So I had the chance actually to, I'm not quite sure which bike was it. I think it was a Gas 2012 with the tech suspension. So this is a very interesting part. So this is genuine Harley Davidson uh, ring. And Harley Davidson is using the Showa suspension. So if you buy this part, the top ring from Honda, I believe it's about $14, either a pair or just one. And I pay for those top rings through Harley Davidson. It's made in Japan, those rings, and I bought them for about $7. So it's crazy. It's 50% basically cheaper. So those are the Harley Davidson. So now I can basically say that my Repsol, it's a Harley Davidson Repsol. But I think that they just basically use exactly the same. Uh, so again, I'm comparing. So this Teflon, and I don't know whether it's a friction, it's just heat creating over there, or it's just basically oil. And this is the one which was on the other side, and I don't know whether you could see it before, but I could see over there a little bit like a small tiny bubble. So obviously I decide not to use it. And again, the one on the brake side, uh, it's a junk, so it have to be replaced. So very often I usually replace the oil uh, twice a year, at least every 6 months. Probably some people replace more often, but with this one here, it's a good idea every time when you replace the oil to when you wash it, to just basically see if it's any particles of the Teflon it's inside, and if it's inside, well, you need to have those top rings ready to replace. Now, there are different tools available. I presume, mechanics, they have access to the beautiful, expensive tools. But this is a garage of the guy uh, who doesn't have too much money to basically buy expensive tools for each individual bike. I'm not making money of putting bike together. So as you can see, I put this all stuff together, and then I put the ring and then the other part. And so this one, it's actually without the spring. So I like to put this upside down and then just basically go with the hand and then tighten up this lower bolt. It's a little bit you need to be patient because everything is moving inside, so just moving this a little bit, and then finally it will catch, and then you can tighten up as much as you can with the hand so everything stays where it's supposed to be. But when this suspension will get on the bike, I will put in with this, according to the spec, and I believe it was 34 newton-meters. So as you can see, I'm putting the top ring and then the washer, and this plastic. This is a plastic pipe, 1.5-inch plastic pipe. I'm just using it as a hammer, and this just basically goes very nicely inside without any issue. So this pipe will cost you $2 instead of the tool, which is $50, and it's actually quite useful. It's always a good idea to put a little bit of the oil so it actually slides. And again, plastic pipe, just regular plastic pipe, 1/2 inch, and then just hammer down. So now I'm just inspecting, making sure that when I put the seal down, I uncovered the small groove where the safety it's going in. So it have to go inside, and then you can help it to push it down a little bit with a screwdriver. It's very easy. It's nothing to it really. Making sure that it's there, and then when you've noticed that it's inside, I usually try to turn around a little bit to make sure that it's actually sitting properly in a nest. And then on the top, again, I'm using a little bit of the oil. I know that some people, they're using some kind of the magic grease over there, but I don't think it's necessary. And you can, or you don't have to. I just have a different pipe. This one was a 2-inch, and then it's perfect for the dust seal to set it on the main body. So this one is ready basically to fill, and then according to Showa, the one without the spring, it's using 410 milliliters of the oil. Now this is the other side. So again, the cartilage, and so I put this cartilage first, and then it have to go on the other side, have to stick out, and then on this side I have to put this, almost look like a glass. Okay, I'm putting still the lower bushing or ring. They usually don't wear out, and this one is very important as well. I think it's called stopper or something like that, I don't know. And then you assemble this with the main body, and the funny part is when you turn this around and then try to put the bolt, you will have a heck of the time to do it. So what better it's to do, just basically put temporary spring inside, turn this whole fork upside down, and then by pushing the fork down you can tighten up very nicely and easily with the 19 millimeters socket. And again, tighten up as much as you can, and then later on you will tighten up this to the spec. And tightening up actually on the bike, it's much easier. So I'm pulling the spring out so it doesn't make any noise. Obviously the new top or upper ring or bushing, then obviously it's better to put big washer and then 1/2 inch plumber pipe. And then I'm just inspecting right now whether it's actually set in place. It seems okay, so I will put the washer and then put the main seal, and again I will use as a hammer my 1/2 inch drain pipe from Home Depot. And then I'm checking whether it's the groove over there for the safety spring. And then when everything is set, I just move this around a little bit, making sure. And then it's time for putting a magic dust seal. And you can either push with your hands down or use 2-inch pipe. I was doing some project at home and I think this is the leftovers, and I figured out, wow, this actually works. Now the springs down, and then pull this up, and I'm not going to put the top part, so it's mean a small washer and then this aluminium tubing and then the top part, because I have to fill up with oil. So the difference between the Showa maintenance book and then tech, I think tech doesn't tells you how many milliliters you have to put inside the fork. It's just mostly you just fill it up with the oil, so the whole fork it's actually stretch, extend, and then you pull the oil and then making sure, and I'm just making this up, I don't remember whether it was 70 milliliters from the top to the level of the oil on the one which doesn't have a spring, and the other one was, let's say, 140 milliliters from the top to the oil level. So it's a little bit more tricky to set up the proper level of the fluid, and especially if you actually use a little bit thicker springs, then obviously the thicker springs will have a little bit more volume, so then automatically the oil you're going to put over there, it will be different. Yes, and I believe, if I recall this, you actually measure this fork actually by pushing this down. So with this one here, Honda, it's actually pretty good with giving you the torque, how much torque you have to use. So like fork cap, the one which is on the top, when you take a look at the as a maintenance book, you look over there, it's just almost look like you need to require 34 newtonometers, and actually it's not. The 34 newtonometers, it's actually not for the lower bolts on the fork, and then on the top it's only 22. So please take this under consideration. Okay, so this one here is at 34 newtonometers, and then if you notice that sometimes it just basically slips a little bit, don't get excited, just put the wheel, put the pressure on it, and then you can tighten up, or just use a little bit more like a pneumatic tool, and it will tighten up. And I put the axle between those two forks, so it was easier for me to tighten up with the specs. Now it's time for the cap, for the top cap. It's a 22 millimeter socket and is 22 newtonometers. And now I am ready to put this stuff together. And those bolts, they are 8 millimeters, M8 metric, with Allen key 6 millimeters. And the good idea is to check the spec as well, and this one calls for 21 newtonometers. And when you take a look actually at the front caliper, this one calls for 26, if I recall correctly, newtonometers. It's always a good idea to put a drop of the Loctite so you don't lose the brakes. Usually when I'm working on the fork or taking off the wheel, I always check the spec on the bolts of the brake disc, as well as clean them and deglaze the brake pads a little bit with the sandpaper, making sure that it's working. It takes you a little bit of time, a little bit extra time, but I think it's worth it. And also, if when whatever wheel I have out, I take the dust seals from the bearings, from the wheel bearings, and then blow with my blow with air. I blow the old grease and then repack with the fresh grease. And I really like to actually do it with a syringe, because then I can push it harder. And then this one, it's just basically straightforward stuff. Front fender, and those are 6 millimeters M6, and if I recall correctly, they call for 10 Newton meters torque over there. So just, it's a good idea to put the axle between them, between the forks, because one fork will be a little bit lower than the other one will be a little bit higher, and then it's just frustrating to put this together. So again, I just speed it up. So as I mentioned before, I'm usually taking off the dust seal, inspect the bearings, and it's a really a good idea to, you know, as often you take off the wheel, it's better if you driving in the conditions where it's rain, wet, or dust. It's a really good idea to blow this all junky grease. And even the brand new bikes, I've noticed that sometimes the grease inside, they just don't put too much. So you enjoy your bike, and then all of a sudden your bearings are just basically in trouble because you didn't put the fresh grease. So do it fairly often, twice a season at least. As you can see, I'm just using a syringe. I put the grease over there, and then you can just nicely pack this stuff. It's pretty good. So the whole idea of this movie is to bring you up a little bit closer to the maintenance of the bike, and give you some kind of the pointers I learn on my own. I also ask my great colleagues what they're doing, how they do it, so you can also make the research. It's obviously we all have a unique way of doing certain things, and maybe you're doing this differently, better, easier, and it's all good. I just basically want to share my ideas with other guys. So I greased the one part of the axle, and I also show you prior this I believe it's called spacer. So it's a little bit, it's like a triangular shape, so the smaller part is going towards the bearing. I also mentioned to you before that I'm checking the bolts on the front wheel disc brake, and it's calling for 19 Newton meters. It's a good idea to check them frequently, not only when you take off the wheel, but even after riding a few times. Some people who buy the trials bikes, they are not familiar with, they are afraid that the front disc has a movement. And this is normal, this is how it's supposed to be. I think that they call this floating disc, so it have to have a movement, because even with the front mudguard and then this bridge between the forks, you still have some movement, some minimal movement between those forks. So if your front brake will be stiff like in the bicycle, then one time the front brake will catch properly, the other time won't properly. So I think that the way how they design those brakes, it's they make it movement, so it's a lateral movement about 1 millimeter. So this is normal. So don't panic. You don't have to over tight them. The Honda calls for 69 Newton meters torque on the main axle, on the front and rear wheel. So I believe that it's a really good idea to to do it with the torque. We have a different strength in our muscles, and sometimes we can just basically destroy the thread. So this one here, it's an 8mm bolt, and I think it was 21 Newton meters. Yeah, it was. So tighten up. You can put the drop of the Loctite as well, so you're not going to lose it. The way how I'm putting it, so I just basically flush with the axle, so it's nicely even. So the last things which we are going to do, we're going to check the brakes. So I mentioned to you before that when I have this out, I like to take the brake pads off and deglaze them. So we're riding in the different conditions, and they have some residue of the sand, water, mud, and they may work better. But it's a good idea to take them off. Just remember which side brake pad was put it on, because you can put the other way around. And the reason is that after a while, especially when you have a used brake pads, one is a little bit has a less wear, the other one a little bit more. And if you put them the other way around, then the brake is not going to work because it just need to wear out again to the way how it works. So I'm using a sandpaper, very fine. I don't know, this one is probably about 200 grit. Just deglaze them a little bit and then just clean them from any kind of the mud residue. The other stuff, it's very important. The reason why you want to work on the seals, on the suspension seal, is that when you have a lot of oil coming out of your fork and then you don't keep attention to it, this oil eventually will find a way on your brake pads, and then you are not only have a problem with the crappy front suspension, but also the brakes are not working. So you're going to end up with replacing the seals eventually, oil, and then plus the brake pads, which they will be contaminated with oil. And I don't think it's a good way to get rid of the oil, contamination oil from the brake pads. Especially some people, they say, oh, you can just bake them, use some, I think it's called this flame thrower, warming up, and then it will decrease the oil, but it's still there, so it's not going to have the same stopping power. So the brakes are very, very important, just like the suspension. So I'm going to clean this one as well. What is interesting to notice, I pushed those plungers actually a little bit deep inside, so it will be much easier for me to put the wheel on. Even when I need to take off the wheel for some different reason, I prefer to take off the brake caliper, and the reason is it's much easier to put this brake caliper without the brake caliper, the wheel first, and then later on the brake pads. I'm sorry, the brake caliper. First the wheel, and then later on the brake caliper. It's just much easier job. It's more enjoyable than actually trying to put the wheel with the brake caliper mounted to the fork. Some people, you can see this spring, this is a safety spring, and it's also supposed to help a little bit to keep the brake pads apart. But I know that some guys successfully, they actually don't use this safety spring over there. I don't know, I just basically, even though that it's a pain in the ass to actually put it there, I'm still using it, but I know that people, they just don't use it, they don't run in any trouble. The only thing is that when you take off the caliper, the brake pads would just, it's a possibility they would just fall off on their own. But the very interesting design is when you turn this upside down, the brake caliper, the brake pads, they are living in a very tight, almost like a glove fitting compartment over there. So if you put them apart, they are not going to fall off. Only when they actually, you bring them together, this is where they're going to fall off. So you can put the spring, or you do not have to. And just make sure that they are living in this kind of the fit groove, a glove fit place. And then when you feel that this is good, then it's next step, it's just to mount this together. The interesting part to mention for you guys, the trials bikes, they called for 5 weights oil, and I used Motul 5 weights, I used the Bellray, and now because it was cheaper, I used the Maxima 5 weight. But either way, you can try all those oils. I don't think that they're like a major difference really between them. They still will eat this Teflon, I guess. It's a good idea when you put the brakes together. Clean first the brake disc with the brake cleaner, and clean rack, and tighten up basically with the 12 millimeter socket those 2 bolts. You can put a drop of the Loctite, and the spec they calling over there, it was 26 Newton meters. But please double check, you know, because maybe I'm mistaken. It's very common that people over tighten those bolts, and then we run into trouble that you destroy the nest. So this is a conclusion of repairing the front Showa suspension, but it's very similar to the tech. So I hope that this was useful for you. Good luck, guys. Bye.